Hello, my name is Nicolas Arguello, and I want to talk about how to get to know your audience today. Um, I think getting to know your audience is one of the most important things for anybody that is on the verge to do a speech or on the verge to do a paper for a certain group of people, or even for anybody in their daily life. Whenever you have to communicate with somebody new, you kind of have to have better perception of what your audience is like to be able to have good communication. So, why is it really important for us to know our audience? It is really important because getting to know your audience is going to already make you a better speaker, just starting off. If you already know what these people want, what they need, you will be able to tailor your information to make it more accessible to them. Also, it's going to give you a more safe and more effective way to communicate with anybody if you already know how they like to get their information and what kind of information they're looking for. So, how do we get to know our audience? First of all, you're going to have to put a lot of time into it, a lot of effort into it, and you're going to have to do a lot of research. Uh, so, it's kind of the only way that you can get to know what your audience is looking at for before you actually go for your speech. Um, Something that was really helpful for me in this chapter and that might be helpful for you was the iceberg model analogy. In the iceberg model analogy, they actually tell us that every person in our audience is kind of like the tip of an iceberg. So you guys know if you guys go to the ocean and you see an iceberg, you might just see the tip. There will be a superficial part of it, but you don't really get to know what is deep inside that water. So those deep characteristics of the iceberg you don't get to see. Same happens with your audience. Whenever you have your audience in front of you, you will be able to see some superficial characteristics such as age, gender, race, and ethnicity. Uh, but you don't really get to see what is really deep inside them. You don't really get to see what deep characteristics they have, such as cultural background, goals, interests, demographic traits, whatever they have in mind. Uh, so demographic traits, I think, is probably one of the most important ones to know because if you already recognize what demographic traits they have, that will give you a better idea of how to communicate with the whole group of people. So demographic traits, first of all, are the characteristics that are going to make somebody an individual, but at the same time, that individual is going to have in common with certain group of people. Uh, for instance, I'm Colombian, so I am individually I'm a Colombian person. I like my own stuff, but if I go back to Colombia, I have a lot of things in common with them. That will be my demographic trait that connects me to other Colombian people. So things like sex, age, level of education, employment, or career status, really anything that makes you part of a group is going to be a demographic trait. If you're able to recognize these demographic traits, then you will be able to appeal to their needs, goals, interests, and motivations of that certain group, and that will be able to give you a better way to communicate with them. It also allows you to do an audience-centered approach instead of an information-centered approach, which means that people is going to feel like you actually care for them, you care to learn what they like, what information they want to receive, instead of just throwing the information that you wanted to throw into them. Um, Another important thing is that you have to improve your perception of who your audience is. You have to be able to perceive who is in your audience, and for this, you can do 6 different things. You can either become an active perceiver, which means that you're going to go and immerse yourself into that demographic group, into that ethnic group, whatever it is, and you will be able to understand better what kind of information they want to get, what their cultural background is, what they like to do, what they don't like to do. In this way, it will be easier for you to tailor your information towards that certain group of people. Second, you have to recognize that everyone has a unique frame of reference, which means that not because you immerse yourself into this group of people, that doesn't really mean that you will be able to understand all of them. You might get a perception of how the culture is, and you don't really get a perception of how every individual is. So don't try to make assumptions and say that because you met 5 people from this group, all the other 20,000 people of this group are going to be the same, and that doesn't work that way. Uh, Another thing that you have to recognize is that people, objects, and situations change. So you can't really be using the same information that you used 10 years ago in a speech, on a speech this year, because things are constantly moving, things are constantly changing and evolving. Even the way that we talk is going to be moving. Uh, So you have to change different things that you used to do. Also, you have to be aware of the role of perception in communication, which means that you have to understand that your perception is not the only perception in the table. People might have another type of perception, and that is okay. It doesn't mean that they are wrong, and it doesn't mean that you are wrong. But if you are able to understand that everybody has a different perspective, it will improve your intercultural communication. The next thing, and it's really related to the last thing that we talked to, it's you have to keep an open mind. If you're able to keep an open mind, you are going to be able to talk about your own perception without having to affect somebody else's perception. So it just means that you're going to be able to learn from what other people have to say without changing what you already have in mind. And then the last thing that you have is that you have to check your perceptions, because you don't want to make assumptions whenever you go into a presentation. If you start making an assumption because you already met 4 people of a certain group, it's not going to be good for you, because then all the people that are not part of that assumption are going to not feel identified with whatever you're saying. For instance, I'm Colombian, and whenever I came here at first, everybody that will ask for my name, they will ask me instantly if I was a soccer player because I was from Colombia, and I'll have to tell them no, I'm a tennis player. So it was just an assumption that they were creating in their mind, because they didn't check their perceptions. They didn't really go to that point where they said, yeah, Colombian people like soccer, but not all Colombians are soccer players. So you always have to check for those perceptions in order to be able to not assume wrong about somebody else.